My ex-husband was smiling at me across the conference table, the kind of smile that used to make me feel chosen. Now I recognized it for what it always was, the smile of a man who believed he had already won. His lawyer slid a stack of papers toward me, a deed transfer, an LLC dissolution form, and a wire authorization I had never signed. My ex reached into his jacket and placed a small silver USB drive on the table like a chess piece. "All you have to do," he said softly, "is plug that in and confirm the transfer. Then this is over." I looked at the USB drive. I looked at my lawyer, who was playing her role perfectly, frowning with just the right amount of concern. I looked at my ex-husband's mother, sitting against the wall in a cream blazer, hands folded, watching me the way a hawk watches something small in a field. Then I looked back at him. "Okay," I said, and I reached for the drive. "Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I want to know who's part of our community." 72 hours earlier, the most dangerous thing in my life was a secondhand espresso machine that kept misfiring steam. I was standing in my kitchen in my apartment in Portland, Oregon. A one-bedroom I had found myself, furnished myself, and paid for with my own money after 18 months of rebuilding from the ground up. The morning light came through linen curtains I had chosen. The bookshelves were mine. The silence was mine. After 4 years of marriage to a man who made me feel like a guest in my own life, that silence was the most valuable thing I owned. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 6 years before the marriage fell apart, I worked as a digital forensics analyst for a mid-sized cybersecurity firm. What that means, in plain language, is that I spend my professional life recovering deleted files, tracing forged documents, and proving things that people believed were permanently hidden. I am very good at it. My ex-husband knew this when he married me. He forgot it entirely by the time he decided to steal from me. My phone buzzed on the counter. My lawyer's name, Diane, lit up the screen. I answered on the second ring. "We have a problem," Diane said. She didn't say good morning. Diane never wasted syllables on pleasantries when there were real things to discuss. It was one of the reasons I had hired her. "Tell me." Opposing counsel filed a motion this morning to expedite the asset settlement. They want everything signed and transferred by end of business Friday. She paused. "That's 3 days, Claire." And they attached a new valuation on the Cascade property. The Cascade property. A piece of land in the Columbia River Gorge that had belonged to my grandmother. 82 acres of timber and creek bed that she had deeded to me personally, in my name alone, 2 years before I got married. The deed was registered in my name. The taxes were in my name. My grandmother had been meticulous, an old woman who grew up poor and understood the difference between a verbal promise and a notarized document. But somewhere in the 18 months since my ex had filed for divorce, that property had developed a new paper trail. A quitclaim deed dated 3 years ago, purportedly signed by me, transferring the Cascade property into a joint LLC my ex had formed with his mother. The signature was not mine. I had never held that pen. "How much did they value it at?" I asked. $4.2 million. I set down my espresso. My ex-husband, whose name was Marcus, had never been interested in 82 acres of Pacific Northwest timber until the moment a development company made an offer on the land. Before that offer, he had called it my hobby farm. He had made jokes about it at dinner parties. He had never once driven out there with me. But $4.2 million had a way of clarifying a person's interests very quickly. "They want the meeting Friday," Diane said. "Marcus's lawyer is calling it a final settlement conference. They're framing it as a courtesy, one last chance to avoid litigation. But Claire," she stopped. "What?" "His mother is going to be there. She's been added as a co-signatory on the LLC. Her name was Vivienne. In 4 years of marriage, she had referred to me as Marcus's wife, never as Claire. She had given me a cookbook every Christmas with the implicit suggestion that I wasn't feeding her son correctly. She had opinions about my career, my hair, my failure to produce grandchildren on her preferred timeline. She smiled with her mouth closed and her eyes open, and she had adored Marcus with the airless, totalizing devotion of a woman who had decided, long before I arrived, that nothing I could give her son would ever be quite enough. I had never hated her. I had simply been exhausted by her. Now, apparently, she had forged a legal document with her son and was attempting to absorb my grandmother's land into a shell company. My exhaustion cured itself overnight. "Tell them I'll be there," I said. "Claire, I'll be there. I'll bring the drive." Diane was quiet for a moment. She knew what the drive meant. We had discussed the plan 2 weeks ago when I first discovered the forged quitclaim deed. She had looked at my proposal for a long time before she said anything. Then she said, "You understand that if this goes sideways, we have nothing." I said, "It won't go sideways." She had looked at me with the patient skepticism of a woman who had watched too many clever plans fall apart in conference rooms. But she had agreed. I hung up the phone and walked to my second bedroom, the one I had converted into a workspace. 2 monitors, an external drive array, a whiteboard covered in timelines. I had been building something for the past 11 days, quiet and methodical, the way I built everything. Not a weapon exactly, a mirror. A very precise, very legal, very devastating mirror. I sat down and got to work. I should tell you how I got here, because the forged deed did not come out of nowhere. Neither did Marcus. We met when I was 26, at a conference in Seattle. He was charming in the way that some men are effortlessly, reflexively, without apparent calculation. He laughed at the right moments. He remembered small details. He made you feel, when he looked at you, like you were the most interesting person in the room. I was not naive. I had dated before. I simply did not yet understand that there is a specific kind of man who has practiced charm the way other people practice a sport, and that mastery of that skill has very little to do with who he actually is. We were married 3 years later. The first year was fine. The second year, I started noticing things. Marcus did not like that I made more money than him. He never said this directly. He said it through 100 small adjustments, the way he would change the subject when I mentioned a case I was proud of, the way he would describe my job at parties as she does, computer stuff, the way he would suggest, gently, that maybe I was working too much, that maybe we needed more balance. What he meant by balance was that I should earn less, that I should want less, that the version of me he had married at 29 should stop growing. By year 3, I had begun to disappear in small ways. I turned down a promotion because the travel seemed like a complication. I stopped talking about my cases at dinner. I donated time and expertise to projects he found impressive rather than ones that interested me. I became, incrementally, the quieter version of myself that made him feel larger. The marriage ended the way these things often do, not with a single detonation, but with a slow leak, until one morning I woke up and understood that I had been rearranging myself to fit a space that had never been designed to hold me, and that the rearranging had to stop. I filed for divorce 18 months ago. What I did not anticipate was that Marcus had spent the last year of our marriage laying groundwork. While I had been grieving the relationship and planning a civil separation, he had been having documents prepared. The forensic examiner they had used was not very good. I found the metadata error in the quitclaim deed within 40 minutes of obtaining a digital copy. The document had been created in a PDF editing suite, and the creation timestamp was 18 months after the date printed on its face. Someone had forged my signature, badly, using a scan from a notarized document I had signed during the purchase of our marital home. They had scaled it slightly wrong. If you knew what to look for, if you had spent 6 years knowing what to look for, it was almost embarrassingly obvious. I did not call Marcus. I did not confront him. I did not send an angry email that would put him on alert. I printed the metadata report, put it in a folder, drove to Diane's office, and said, I want to build a box around them and let them walk in. The drive I was building was not a USB full of malware or anything dangerous or illegal. It was a documentation package, a self-executing verification tool that, when plugged into any machine, would compile and transmit its contents to 3 recipients simultaneously: the Oregon State Bar, the County District Attorney's Cybercrime Unit, and the Federal Court's electronic filing system. The contents included the metadata analysis, a chain of custody report, the original notarized signature used for the forgery, a forensic comparison from a certified examiner I had hired independently, and a 53-page timeline I had constructed of every communication Marcus and Vivienne had exchanged with the real estate development company since before my grandmother died. The USB drive I was planning to plug in during the meeting was not that drive. It was a blank. The real drive had already been submitted. All I needed was for Marcus to confirm in a recorded meeting that he was presenting a forged document as legitimate. All I needed was for him to ask me to execute a fraudulent transfer. His words, his request, his lawyer present, conference room cameras, all of it time-stamped. Then the box would close. Friday arrived gray and cold. A typical November morning in Portland. I wore a charcoal blazer. I carried a leather folio. I arrived 8 minutes early because I wanted to be seated when they walked in. Diane was already there, arranging papers. She looked up when I came in and gave me a brief evaluating look. Ready? She said. Yes. Marcus arrived 5 minutes later with his attorney, a man named Garrett, who had the practiced smoothness of someone who had settled a lot of cases by making the other party feel they were lucky to be getting anything at all. Vivienne came in behind them, unhurried, wearing that cream blazer, her silver hair set and precise. She acknowledged me with a look that managed to convey, without a word, that she considered my presence in this room a formality. Marcus sat down across from me. Up close, he looked tired. There were shadows under his eyes I didn't remember. His confidence was present, but it was working harder than it used to. "Claire," he said, as if we were acquaintances who had run into each other at a restaurant. "Marcus," I said. Garrett opened the meeting with paperwork. A summary of assets, 2 copies of the LLC operating agreement, the quitclaim deed with my supposed signature. He slid them across the table one at a time, with the rhythm of a man who believed he was controlling the room. "As we outlined in our filing," Garrett said, "the Cascade parcel was transferred into the Meridian Land LLC by mutual agreement prior to the disputed period. The deed is recorded. The LLC is co-held by Mr. Mason Whitfield and his mother, Vivienne Whitfield. The current offer from Cascadia Development represents a significant and time-sensitive opportunity." "I never signed that deed," I said. Garrett paused. He had a very good neutral face. "Mrs. Whitfield." "I kept my name. It's Miss Hartley." He adjusted without missing a beat. "Miss Hartley, the deed is notarized and registered with the county." "The deed was created in Adobe Acrobat Pro on March 14th of last year," I said. "The date printed on the face of the document is November 2nd, 3 years ago. The creation metadata and the edit log are inconsistent. The signature was extracted from a 2019 mortgage document and scaled by a factor of 0.93. I have a forensic certification report that details all of this." I opened my folio. "I can provide the file number if you'd like to pull it." The room was very quiet. Marcus's jaw was doing something careful and controlled. Vivienne's expression had not changed, which told me she was working to keep it that way. Garrett said, "I'm not sure what you think you have." "I know what I have," I said. "What I'm less certain about is what you have. So let's find out." That was Diane's cue. She placed a single-page document on the table, a notice of filing. The forensic report, the metadata analysis, the chain of custody certification, and the full communications timeline had been submitted to the district attorney's cybercrime unit 48 hours ago. The filing was already live. Marcus looked at the document. Something moved behind his eyes. It was not quite fear. It was the specific expression of a man recalculating very quickly. "This is a negotiating tactic," Garrett said, but his voice had lost something. "It's a court filing," Diane said pleasantly. "You can verify the case number." Marcus looked at me. He leaned back. And then he did something I had not expected. He smiled. The old smile. The chosen smile. The smile that had worked for years. His voice dropped to something quieter, something that excluded the lawyers and reached across the table for just the two of us. "Claire," he said, "come on. You know this is going to be long and ugly and expensive if we fight it. I know you. You don't want this." He paused. "Just confirm the transfer. Take your settlement and walk. You'll be fine." He slid the USB drive across the table. "Plug that in, authorize the account access, and it's over today. No litigation, no years of depositions. Just done." He said it like he was offering me a kindness. And I thought about a night 4 years ago, 8 months into our marriage, when I had stayed up until 2 a.m. rebuilding a corrupted evidence set for a case that mattered to me. And Marcus had stood in the doorway of my office and said, not unkindly, "Don't you think you're past needing to prove yourself?" I had turned off the monitor and come to bed because some part of me was still trying to be the version of me that fit the space. I was not that version anymore. I looked at the USB drive. "Okay," I said, and I reached for the drive. Diane made a small sound. Marcus relaxed. I picked up the drive and turned it over in my fingers. It was a good prop. Clean, professional. I set it back on the table. "I'm not going to plug that in," I said. "But I want you to know that every word spoken in this room has been recorded under Oregon's single-party consent law, which I confirmed with 2 separate attorneys before this meeting." I looked at Garrett. "You might want to review what your client just said on the record. Asking a counterparty to execute a fraudulent transfer using a forged deed as leverage is wire fraud. It is also extortion under Oregon Statute 164.075. I looked at Marcus. "You asked me if I wanted a long and ugly fight. I don't. Which is why I already finished it before I walked in the door." Vivienne spoke for the first time. Her voice was perfectly controlled. "You are making a serious mistake." I turned to look at her directly, which was something I had not done for most of the meeting, something she had probably noticed. "Vivienne," I said, "you co-signed the LLC. Your name is on the operating agreement. Your email is in the communications timeline I submitted to the DA. Specifically the email you sent to Marcus on April 3rd of last year that says, and I'm going from memory here, the signature we pulled from the 2019 file is clean enough, no one will look that close." I paused. Someone looked. Her hands tightened on the table. The manicured composure held, but underneath it, something had gone very still. This is the part I need to explain, because I know what you might be thinking. I know some of you are wondering why I came to this meeting at all. Why not simply let the legal process run? Why sit across from them? Because evidence of forgery in a civil proceeding is not the same as a criminal prosecution. The DA's submission gets the criminal file moving, but it does not immediately resolve the civil asset dispute. Marcus's team could have filed counter motions, challenged the forensic report, stretched the process across 3 years of hearings while the development offer expired. Legal processes are slow, and I was tired of slow. I needed them to implicate themselves, on record, in the same room as their attorney, so that there was no version of events in which they could later claim they hadn't understood what they were doing. I needed them to ask me to authorize a fraudulent transfer so that the wire fraud charge was clean and inarguable. I needed Marcus to say, out loud on a recording, that he wanted me to plug in a drive and confirm account access, knowing the underlying deed was forged. He had done exactly that. The meeting ended poorly for 3 of the 4 people in the room. Garrett requested a recess. Marcus went very quiet in a way that I had never seen before, not the silence of someone composing himself, but the silence of someone who has run a calculation and found the answer unacceptable. Vivienne gathered her bag and walked out without speaking, which I think was the right instinct on her part. I took my recording, shook Diane's hand, and walked out into a Portland November, gray and damp and mine. The aftermath was not simple or fast, and I want to be accurate about this because I know you want to know what actually happened. Marcus and Vivienne were both named in the criminal referral. Garrett withdrew from the case 11 days later, citing a conflict of interest, which is attorney language for learning something about your client's conduct that makes your continued representation untenable. Marcus was charged with first-degree forgery, attempted wire fraud, and fraudulent use of a legal instrument. Vivienne was charged as a co-conspirator on the forgery count. Their criminal proceedings moved separately from the civil case. The Cascade property was confirmed as my sole asset through summary judgment, which came through faster than expected once the forgery was established and opposing counsel had evaporated. The development offer had a 30-day extension clause I had not known about. It held. The sale closed 4 months later. Marcus accepted a plea agreement. 14 months, suspended sentence with 2 years supervised probation, mandatory restitution, and a civil judgment in my favor for the legal costs I had incurred. His record would not be sealed. Vivienne received a deferred sentence contingent on completing a diversion program and paying restitution. She did not speak to me at any point during the proceedings. I did not expect her to. I received, sometime in the spring following all of this, a handwritten letter forwarded through my attorney from Marcus. I stood at my kitchen counter with my espresso, the machine behaving itself for once, and I held the envelope for a moment. I thought about what was probably inside, an explanation that was also a justification, an apology constructed to serve itself, a version of events in which he was also a victim of something. I put it in the recycling unopened. There is a particular silence that comes after something you have been carrying for a long time is finally set down. It is not comfortable at first. You keep reaching for the weight and finding air. You think about the years spent adjusting, shrinking, making yourself fit. You think about the woman who turned down a promotion because it seemed like a complication. You think about all the rooms you made yourself smaller to stand in. The Cascade property sold in late spring. I walked through it one last time before the closing, alone, on a morning when the creek was loud and the Douglas firs were dripping from overnight rain. My grandmother had bought this land for $11,000 in 1974. She had come out here every summer with a folding chair and a thermos of coffee, and she had sat by the creek and, as she once told me, listened to the trees do their work. She had left it to me, not as an investment, but as a place to come back to, a place to remember that some things belong to you entirely. I stood at the creek for a while. Then I drove back to Portland, transferred what I needed to a foundation I had been planning for 2 years, and kept the rest. I rented a slightly larger apartment. I bought a better espresso machine. I took the promotion I had declined 4 years ago. Some people have asked me, over the months since this resolved, whether I feel guilty. Whether watching Marcus walk into a criminal proceeding was something I carried differently than I expected. The honest answer is no. What I carry instead is something harder to name, a kind of clarity about what I will accept and what I will not, a knowledge of what I am capable of when I stop rearranging myself, a memory of my own voice in that conference room, level and certain, saying the words I had prepared, watching the room shift around me. I think about my grandmother, who had no digital forensics training and no legal strategy, who simply read every document before she signed it and put things in writing when it mattered, who told me once, when I was small, that the most useful thing a woman can own is the habit of paying attention. I paid attention. That is the whole story. If any of this resonated with you, if you've been in a room where someone underestimated you, where someone counted on your patience being indistinguishable from weakness, tap the like button and tell me about it in the comments. This community is built on stories like this one, and I want to hear yours. I'll see you in the next one.